adult social care. We are seeing people going into long-term care and then having to go through this horrendous process of financial assessment, where of course if you're in domiciliary care, you don't have your house assessed as costs. The other thing to point out, the Shropshire Council currently is doing a consultation about how it's going to implement the Care Act, and there's some really worrying things in there.
Graham, you're on your one last point.
Okay, the last point I'll say is they're talking about potentially being able to assess not just the value of your property but also the value of possessions. So you better, I think that looks like they're going to have to train social workers to be valuing antiques, or you better look out where your Ferrari is, because they're going to take that into account as well.
Great, thank you very much. Which is a massive question, so I will take a deep breath. Britain's MPs have betrayed the people over more than 4 decades and have given vital powers to the EU without consent of the electorate. There is the question of betrayal in terms of constitutional illegality. There are 2 systems of law and government that are in contention over Britain's membership of the EU. 1, the supremacy of Parliament, with the Queen in Parliament fatally compromised. 2, the constitutional impasse that has resulted in our Westminster Parliament being almost impotent, thereby subjecting the Queen to alien powers. Final sentence. With politicians in possession of such power, can the electorate ever again trust our politicians? I'm going to urge the candidates to try and stick to a couple of minutes each for their answers to this one, and we'll begin with you, Kit.
Well, that seems appropriate. In 1975, we voted to stay in a common market, and what we've got now is the European Union. We were not asked if we wanted to change the situation. The EU doesn't come into existence until 1993 after the Maastricht Act. So yes, we've not given our consent. We've not had an opportunity to do it. So it's no surprise really that trust in politicians is its lowest ebb. When you have a political class whose experience in the main consists of moving from their public school to Oxbridge and then into working for a political party or for another politician, followed by going into a safe seat, and their aim appears to be holding on to power for power's sake, it's very difficult to have any sense that they understand the plight of the ordinary person. When people tell you one thing, Ted Heath, I remember saying, there will be no loss of sovereignty. Well, we know what happened there. There'll be no tuition fees. Well, that changed, didn't it? No ifs, no buts, immigration will be down to the tens of thousands. Well, it's hundreds of thousands. I've abolished boom and bust. Well, boom, maybe. Then, and famously, matters will not rest there about the Lisbon Treaty, but they did. So, it's no wonder that that sort of attitude has eroded trust. Once a person's reneged on a promise, how can anyone trust his or her word again? But the solution is in your own hands. We need to elect a completely new breed of politician, preferably one who isn't a politician at all. MPs who'll stand up for Britain against the EU, and not the other way around. People who've had a real job in the real world, and who listen to the concerns of the people rather than ignoring them, or worse, trying to shut down any debate by insulting voters, calling them names. It's those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And all I can say to you is please use your vote wisely on May the 7th. Thank you.
Some questions from
I'm not a politician, I'm just an ordinary bloke who lives in Bagley. And I've got an emotional thing I want to say first. This question uses words like betrayal and alien powers. And my grandfather died in the trenches. He went off to fight in the First World War. He died in 1917. He left behind his 7-year-old son who he never saw again. And that was my father. And I'm not willing to engage in a situation where I'm going to be words like betrayal and alien powers because I support staying in the European Union. I'm just as proud of this country as anybody else. And certainly the position I take is a position that Britain is better in the European Union in terms of we've seen 2 or 3 generations of peace that we've never had before, with a Europe where we work together rather than suddenly take up arms and fight each other. We see a place where Britain, as part of the European Union, is part of a 500 million market, but also Britain as a world player. Yes, we're in the UN Security Council. We're leaders in the Commonwealth. We're leading NATO. And suddenly, to withdraw from the EU, to find ourselves isolated in the world, would diminish us. And in terms of Britain's position in the world, so in terms of peace, in terms of Britain's position in the world, but primarily the economic case. The economic case for Britain in the European Union is powerful. It's supported by the CBI, the vast majority of industrialists and trade unions in this country. We're in a situation where it's our largest trading partner, 40% of our trade is with Europe, and the Labour Party's position is that we don't see that forget the Labour Party's position. My position is I'm not willing to have betrayal and alien parties thrown at me. I'm just as British as anybody else, and the European Union, this European Union is, in my opinion, the place that we should be.
So Britain is better than the European Union?
Well, my views are very clear. You'll probably talk to the only person on this panel who's been president of a European organisation. I took a business from 15% export to 95% export. I was president of the European Tanners. And we ran the meetings in French because the Germans couldn't follow. In fact, they couldn't understand totalised except them in German. So I'm as good a European as you're going to find anywhere on this panel. But go back to what Graham said. This was always a political project. Jean Monnet was absolutely driven by the horrors of Verdun, where the French and Germans lobbed 12 million shells at each other, and he was responsible for bringing the shells to the front. He was completely driven by the fact that the war was caused by democratic states being able to overrule the centre. And the League of Nations failed again because, although it was doing something terribly valuable in 1939, the day the Panzers went over the frontier, it was negotiating the standardisation of railway level crossings. It rather missed the big picture. And he was completely determined to create something where democratic states would be overruled. So the first start was the coal and steel community, which are the two obviously main ingredients you need to start a war. And all along, this was a political project. The centre could always overrule the democratic states. Now, I've been MP for 18 years. I was on all sorts of committees, on the European Committee. We could never, ever alter any regulation coming through from Brussels. Absolutely nothing. We went through all the procedures, but they were turned upside down. So you used to have knights from Shropshire go down to London, have a bright idea, put on a piece of paper, go through the whole parliamentary process, in which case it could be voted out, or appealed, or amended. And even once it was passed, if it didn't work out, you could still get rid of it. That does not apply to European law. We had one occasion when, sadly, a Liberal got stuck in the lift and a Labour guy was ill, when we could have reversed something, and even then, it would have gone to the floor of the House of Commons, and the Commons couldn't have overturned it. So I actually had a private member's bill called the European Communities Act 1972, bracket disapplication bill, which would make British law, give British judges the right to overrule European law. Where we are now is that we come to a fork in the road. We've been lied to for generations. I agree with the premise of the question. We were told we were entering a market in 1992. People of Britain have voted overwhelmingly for the single market, which is of a massive benefit. But the single market is not the same as the European Union. That's the critical point to make, and people get muddled about this, and you get all the emotional stuff about stopping wars. What you're seeing now is real danger of violence breaking out in places like Greece and southern Spain, where they're locked into a euro at which you cannot create wealth. The only way to resolve the problems of the euro is to create effectively a new country. And to do that, you've got to have a new treaty, which will be conformed to German law, where you can transfer funds from the wealth-creating areas, southern Germany, southern Holland, etc., down to those which are trapped in the euro. We can never go there. It doesn't matter which of us is elected on this panel, the UK is never ever going to join the euro. So they are effectively leaving us. We have an opportunity to let them go their way. As our neighbours, we wish them well, but we can then go back to where we always wanted to be. We can leave the political, we can leave the judicial. Now, the judicial is vital. When I turned up at DEFRA, I was astounded to find that thanks to the complete mess Mrs Beckett made of the last CAP reform, we were handing back £600 million sterling in tranches. It's called disallowance, a fine to you and me. This happens the whole time. In DEFRA as a Secretary of State, on a daily basis, I was making fine judgments as to how far we could push the Commission, wholly unknown agents within the Commission, where some matters possibly twitched on the question of translation. And we were up against that. We could leave all that, we could become active members of the European Economic Area through possibly joining EFTA. That's what delivers the jobs. Nick talked about 3 million jobs. I didn't believe it's 3 million jobs. It's probably about 4.5, 5 million jobs. That is the single market. We do not have to be part of the political and the judicial arrangement of the current European Union to enjoy the European Economic Area. If we go on the European Economic Area as an entity, EFTA would become the 4th biggest trade bloc in the world, but incredibly importantly, we get back our full seat and voting rights on the key international bodies. You'll be aware of the WTO, you'll be aware of the ILO. If I go back to my DEFRA stuff, food is decided actually at world level by Codex Alimentarius. Matters to do with plants and forestry, the IPPC, and very important, animal is the OIE. And we can work with like-minded countries in the Anglosphere, the States, New Zealand, Australia, people in South America we will work closely with, and we could actually frame world regulation, where at the moment we're represented by the European Union, representing 28 countries. We have a 28th of a say in that vote. And once it's decided at world level, nobody gets this at the moment, that law cannot be changed. It comes down to the European Union, which acts basically as a local electricity substation and distributes the law. So all this rubbish about Norwegian facts law is tosh. The Norwegians have a real role. They have a huge 3 billion fish export industry. They chair the Codex Committee on Fish and Fish Products and have a real role in it. What would happen then is we would become massive players in regalvanising world trade. The utter tragedy of the world at the moment is the free trade's broken down. I apologise for looking at my iPad. I had a flash from the BBC. 400 people have drowned in the Mediterranean today. Why? Because they're desperate to escape Africa because there's no economic activity. And what would happen is that UK would be a huge player suddenly. We'd work with the States. I was in Washington 3 weeks ago. We'd work with our neighbours in the existing European Union, but we'd also embrace the Anglosphere, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, these other people, all our links to the Commonwealth, India, Pakistan. We get on well with China thanks to the way we left Hong Kong, Malaysia. We will be massive positive players in regalvanising world free trade. That is something that's a real prize. So all this emotional stuff about being good Europeans, it's all tosh. Okay, I'm as good a European as you'll get anywhere. I'm the biggest internationalist you've got on this panel. We don't have to be part of the current EU to enjoy the benefits of the market. And the only vote this evening you're looking at to get a referendum to set that precedent in train, Blunt is voting Conservative. You vote Labour, you get Mr Miliband. You vote UKIP, you get Mr Miliband. You vote Green, you get Mr Miliband. You vote Lib Dem, you get Mr Miliband. You vote for me, you get Mr Cameron, and you get a referendum. Let's start.
Europe obviously arises a lot of strong passion and quite a lot of hubris, I think, as well. I mean, my dad fought in the Second World War, was injured there, and we could go back and talk about that as well. But I'd rather look to the future for what prospects we're giving to our young people and how we can help them. Short answer to the question, the Green Party believes in the referendum because the Green Party believes in democracy. And the Green Party believes it's appropriate now to have a referendum on our future membership of the European Union. Green Party would actually campaign to stay in it. We want to see a massively reformed Europe, but we think before this rosy picture about us leaving Europe and becoming part of this wonderful rainbow world, just look at what the CBI, that very green radical organisation, the CBI, they estimate the net benefit to us. The net benefit, taking account of the payments we make, the net benefit to the country is between 60 and 78 billion pounds a year. So these are the parties who can't find 5 billion to make 3 social care for the elderly, but repairs accountants losing 62 to 78 billion pounds a year. Who do we actually export to? Who are our young people, if they're in export? Five of the top 7 countries we export to are in the European Union. Germany alone, we have 150 billion pounds worth of exports. The only we can suddenly leave and continue to trade with these people, do you think that's likely? Do you think they're really going to say, oh, wonderful Britain, you've chosen to leave, but we'll continue to export with you? And also, where does that, can I just interrupt you? Can I finish my
All the
point?
time.
Who brings investment into the country? Where does the investment in the UK come from? 47%, nearly half of that investment comes from the European Union. Now 47% comes from countries in the European Union outside of Britain. So it's a very big issue before you start taken in by this wonderful rhetoric. There is none to stop us trading with China and America and all the other countries. None of that with the European Union stops us from trading with those other places. But behind that is a bit of an agenda. There's something called TTIP floating around. And TTIP is a trade deal which America wants to push through, and which some people in the European Union want to push through, and the Conservatives want to push through, and they've been supported by these other 2 parties as well, but would actually mean companies could start taking the country to court if it hits their profits. What does that mean? Well, at the moment, Philip Morris, who manufactures cigarettes, are actually suing the Australian government because the Australian government dared to bring in legislation to ban advertising on cigarette packets, which requires being plain backwards. Perfect democratic entitled to do that, but under a similar arrangement to TTIP, that hit the profits of Philip Morris, and they're entitled to sue the Australian government. And that's the sort of proposals that are coming in, which would give global companies the trump card over countries and democracy. So, going back to what we say, don't be hoodwinked by all this glorious or wonderful world waiting for us. We have got to see a reformed Europe. It's a scandal, the waste of money that's occurring with Europe at the moment. But our place for our young people is to be an active part of that. Cameron has let us down in not forming alliances with Europe to take that forward. The Green Party has built those alliances. The Green Party is quite significant actually as a player across Europe and other countries, and we can take that forward for a better future for our common good.
Yeah,
first of all, I think I should just echo what Graham said at the start. Whether you're a sceptic or a Europhile, I think some of the language used in this question perhaps is a little bit unnecessary. Just as one should never accuse the Eurosceptic movement of being a racist one, nor should one ever believe that a Europhile is thereby betraying people. I just think that's an important distinction to make. On Europe, we see in our country today this polarisation over Europe, and it's an issue that I will address. The Lib Dems have got some quite radical policies for reforming the EU, which might surprise some people, but I really do think that we've got to get away from this view that leaving Europe will lead us to salvation as a country. The Lib Dems believe the European Union is not perfect, and nor am I in love with every piece of legislation that comes out of the EU. But I really do think, and this is perhaps a slightly separate point, but I really do think we do need to get away from this view that the EU is the root cause of the social problems in this country. And I believe UKIP in particular have got real questions to answer about the way almost any question that will be asked tonight, they will come back to the EU. I just think that's really quite lazy politics. But there is certainly reform needed in the EU. The Lib Dem want Britain to remain a member of the EU. I'm unashamedly pro-European. We're fighting for a stronger economy and British jobs. Being in Europe allows us as a country to project strength in the world when negotiating things like climate change agreements, where we've done quite a lot of green work, in trade talks with global players like the USA and China, and also to project strength when introducing sanctions against countries with horrendous regimes such as Russia or Syria. These are really important issues that need to be addressed. Being in Europe gives us that voice of strength, and I would campaign to the death to see us remain in Europe, because I think it's so important that we keep up that level of strength. You know, who's going to take notice of us when we leave the EU? Who is going to take notice of a small little country? You know, we're a great country, but we're tiny. Being in the EU gives us such a great level of power, and I'm really proud of what the EU's done, sanctioning Russia, for example. It's stuff to be really proud of. But also the Lib Dems believe that it's time for the EU to stick to what it's good at and stop doing what it's not good at. And this is where some of the issues arise, the ever-creeping union. And there are some things the Lib Dems want to see stopped. We want to see it keep creating jobs, we want to see it keep fighting climate change, we want to see the EU keep combating cross-border criminal gangs, but we want to see it stay out of decisions that are better decided at national, devolved or local levels. For an example, we're going to try and ensure that migrants from the EU come to Britain to work or study, not to claim benefits. I think it's a really important one. We want to scrap online barriers so that British firms can sell their products to 500 million EU customers. We want to exempt small business from EU legislation where possible, and the Lib Dems actually managed this in the last 5 years, and we managed to